It's Robert Ogilvy, Executive EQ Coach. Oh, I forgot to make Rocket Chip go now. Okay, make Rocket Chip go now. Hey, it's Bobby Ogilvy. I'm glad you guys are here. I normally don't do videos on the weekend, but I thought I would. I thought I would share some thoughts. And this one's kind of a lighter, more conceptual one, which is important if you're thinking about how you want to improve over time. Less of this immediate, hot tactic we're going to use, and more about wrapping your brain around how continuous improvement actually comes to be. Okay, so 60-30-10 rule. This actually comes out of work for people that do team processes and look at organizational performance. And what they basically saw as a rough rubric is that 60% of performance is based on strategy and organizational factors, and in that we would include cultural factors, all kinds of factors. Then 30% is due to the individual team or group you're a part of and the way you have to execute those work processes. And only 10% is due to individual performance. Okay, so one obvious point is that if we're talking about developing talent, just focusing on that 10% isn't sufficient. And so, the reason this is first off important to hear, important to know, is that coaching often is so a big element of coaching is one-on-one, right? But if the rest of that 90% is working against you, you're just pushing a boulder uphill. And I would actually even say that you end up implicitly or explicitly blaming employees for what is basically bad processes and bad overall strategy and organization, right? Sloppy organization. I'm not talking about workflow processes, but that would be in the 30%. Anyway. And so of course, so at least now once you're dealing with individuals and teams, you have 10 plus 30, you have 40% you can influence. But again, this is still happening within a context, right? This is still happening within an organizational context. One of the things you've probably heard me mention in other videos is that as Agile becomes more prolific, and not just more teams of various industry and types are using it, but particularly I would say more teams within a given organization, you could say higher saturation within the organization. What it's revealing is how headless, business strategy-wise, headless the organization is, right? That it's not able to use those explore skills and adapt enough. It doesn't know how to validate, and as essentially it's getting its teams, it's boosting the operational excellence of its teams. It's still trying to tout up bad business strategies, and that. That means that 10 plus 30% is always, coming up against the resistance of the kind of sloppily done 60% above it, right? And that's really painful. So what this is important for us as managers, as executives, as leaders, is to realize that if we want any long-term improvement, we have to target the 30% and the 60%, right? Okay, so how do we do that? So that would be the question. That is, the ongoing art of how do we build better teams? How do we get that 30% going better? How do we figure out better processes? But how do we build better organizations, better culture? What this is actually kind of meaning is that there's a lot of times culture is working against us. And really, I would think as you become a large organization, there is just it's almost like we know the culture gets worse and worse and worse, and so we take that for granted, right? And so, yeah, sure, there's allowed to be some amount of churn rate, there's allowed to be some amount of lost expenses, there's allowed to be some amount of disengagement and presenteeism and lots of other things like that. But it's almost like it becomes so accepted that that's the norm, right? Oh, no, yeah, we totally should lose 30% of our staff every year, right? It's like, should we? Isn't that indicative of that we don't really have a culture that people want to take part in, or that that has a place for them, right? And I say that simply because it feels really bad when you're the one individual, when you're one of the few individuals which wants good changes to happen, right? And then it feels like you're the 10% against the 90% who's trying to get good change to happen. And that's a painful spot to be in. And so. Here's a bit of wisdom for you in terms of if you're in an organization, you're feeling that. So first of all, look at the team around you, and first think, great, how can I get that 30% around me working better? How can I get my workflow process working better? How can I get these team dynamics working better? And this is a good time to remember the 16 conditions, and they're some of the people that are quick to remind us about the 60-30-10 rule, right? So let's just quickly recap what the 16 conditions are. The three essential ones are that you have the right talent on board, that they are sufficiently diverse and not just have the right skills and talent needed, but sufficiently diverse in their thinking and their personality and their perspective, and that's part of the distributed cognition, the quality thinking comes out of the group. That there's a compelling purpose, there's a good consequential thing worth doing, which is compelling and motivating to the people around you, and that you actually have to operate as a somewhat stable bunch of team members that have to cooperate to get this done, right? And then the three enabling conditions are that there's good sound structure in terms of how you're operating. There's enough support so you can actually get things done. You have the meeting space, the resources, the software, the upper stakeholder support, etc., to get your work done. And lastly, that there is team coaching, which really comes down to having outside, it could be outside or inside input, but having added input to learn your lessons well and grow better over time, right? These are all things you can do to tackle the 30%. And again, we know if we can tackle that these things are actually affecting 80% of the team's level of performance, right? How do we start to get to that 60%? Like these are the big questions, right? I'm starting to become of the mindset, one of the reasons we're more and more interested in startups is that I actually, and maybe this is a bit cynical, I'm starting to wonder to what degree large organizations actually can change or want to explore new business models. What seems to be the case when you look at large organizations is that they, and this depends on size strata, obviously, but they not just can't innovate, but they at best maybe know they can't innovate, and so they, very large firms might acquire half a dozen to a dozen smaller firms per year, and then be going through this battle of how do you integrate them and how do you leverage a portfolio around them, right? I'm thinking of one particular one here in the Atlantic region, and IBM acquired the cybersecurity company. They had probably the best cybersecurity product in the world at that point. IBM had a great brand, and then they can now, use this thing across the world, right? And so when it works well, that's a good example of it. But a lot of M&As fail, and I would say, and if they fail to deliver a good value, right? It might be planned well, but somehow it doesn't really end up being well, right? There's a lot more analysis to go into that, but one of the ways I would look at that is that the larger, more resource organization, which is eating the smaller one, they have a big stuck inertia and momentum that wants to stay a certain way. So it doesn't matter if they acquire a 50-person or even as large as a 500-person organization. It just goes into that multi-thousand-person big dinosaur, which is there and doesn't really want to change, right? And the most recent example I can say of this that people actually get is that there's lots of, when you're in the death of a 1,000 cuts into things where there's nothing new and value capturing that you can do to add value, you're just working on kind of controlling expenses. It's a defense tactic, right? It's a delay tactic. You can't win the game that way. You could just prevent death. And the best example of that, I would say, is Yahoo, right? Yahoo hasn't been relevant since the mid-2000s, but it wasn't until, 2018 it died, or 2019, right? But they were defunct. They had poor market position for years, right? What was even their business model? I don't know. Probably a less effective version of Google's advertising and something around search, right? And so that's a great example of one that it didn't have its 60% going well, but it had so many people there and so much in play that it's going to take a while for that to finally come out. That's one of the reasons you'll hear me in these videos be talking about not just innovation, but the need for both explore and exploit business models, right? The exploit part is that you understand a good business model, you understand a bit about day-to-day operations and how to execute things and some basic chops of HR. And then the explore end of things is you're getting even better at kind of new products and services, how you would validate that. And I would say how to cheaply, quickly, and bite-sized pieces validate that, right? I think the classic kind of great man theory of leadership would be, we need this big Hail Mary pass and let's put lots of people and lots of money on this one thing that could save us. And the right answer is more like, no, we're doing lots of experiments. We're doing more like monthly experiments or quarterly experiments. And if these can accumulate in the right direction, we can get much further, much faster, much more effectively, right? There's a lot that could be said on this, but the point is that if you're the individual even in a very happy sense being coached, remember that that's just 10% of it. And if you want long-term improvement over time, you got to be looking at the 30% team level and the 60% organizational and strategy level, right? So these are the factors you need to be influencing. If you're a manager or you're an executive leader, this is where you got to focus your effort. These are the complex problems where you can really add long-term value. All right. That's it for me for now. I love you guys. I'll see you next time. Again, Robert Ogilvie, Executive EQ Coach.